Alright, this video is about how I got off of a Red Bull addiction. So from roughly early 2018 to the middle of this year, 2019, I was really addicted to Red Bull, and it built up slowly, my specific addiction. First I started drinking one a day, then maybe a week later, two a day, every day. And then finally, this built up more and more and more. And then some days I would be drinking 6 or more every day. Sometimes 6 or more, usually at least 4 a day. And there's a lot of reasons behind this, but one of the main reasons was I was going through really severe depression, and I had some other issues like stress at work that I was dealing with. And I've loved Red Bull for many years, but I never drank so many in one day. You know, maybe I drink 1 or 2 a day once in a while, but I've never consistently drunk, 4 or more every day. And it got to the point with the Red Bull addiction where I could literally drink 1 or 2 Red Bulls, and right after that Red Bull cans, and I could literally fall asleep soon after. So I had a huge tolerance for the sugar and caffeine. So basically, as my tolerance built up, I had to drink more and more to get the same effects. And so how did I get off of this addiction? So this actually took planning. I don't think I could have done this randomly. It really did take planning. And going back to the depression, I think the real reason I was drinking so many every day was because this was a way to numb my emotional pain. I was going through really a lot, and so the depression, it got worse and worse over time. So the Red Bull thing kind of went along with that. Okay, so how did I get off of my Red Bull addiction? Okay, so the first thing, number 1, was working on my mental state. So very often when people talk about changing yourself through dieting, exercise, or other ways, they often leave out mental health, and I think that's definitely a very important thing, because if you have something like depression or other mental health issues, it can be extremely difficult to get off of an addiction if you have such issues. So anyway, the first thing I did was working on my mental state and working with trying to deal with my depression, and it actually did take a lot of work. So among other things, I got lots of help from friends. I did lots of thinking and worked quite a lot on personal development. And basically when I got the lowest point, you'd say rock bottom, eventually I made a decision to change for a lot of different things in my life. And eventually I started meditating nearly every day, exercising usually at least 5 days a week, and having a much healthier diet. So this definitely helped with my depression. But anyway, so working on my mental health was the first step, and maybe the most important step for getting off of my addiction. Okay, so number 2, the second thing, the second step for getting off this addiction was actually deciding to get off of the addiction. And this might seem quite insignificant, but actually it's very significant, because if I didn't actually decide to do it, I don't think I actually would have done it. And I don't know if I had a specific, I don't remember the specific date, or I never had the type of goal where you write down a date by which you want to finish the goal, but I basically had a rough idea. And as I mentioned, if I didn't actually decide to do this, I probably wouldn't have done it, and I wouldn't have gone through the effort of the things required to change. Okay, so in the past, I have an example of. I have a few examples, but one of the big examples where I made a big decision to change was basically when I was really obese. There was a short period in my life where I got fairly obese, and this also was likely due to depression. But eventually I got fat enough to where I decided one day that I just had to change. And so I lost a lot of weight very quickly. Within 2 months, I lost quite a lot of weight. So I was exercising, nearly every day. I changed my diet quite a bit. And actually, when I travel, I'm often quite amused because my passport has a picture of myself when I was obese a few years ago. And immigration officers often think I'm using a fake passport. So, although it's sometimes a hassle when they're, doing something like this, looking at it several times, that for me, makes me feel good in that, I knew a while back I weighed a lot more, and I made a decision to change. So this, among other reasons, I knew I had some potential to change to get off of this addiction. And in terms of actually changing, I had to work on changing a habit. And one of the best books I've ever read about habits, it's called The Power of Habit. It's by Charles Duhigg. And basically, he goes quite in depth about the science of habits and habits in general, and specifically how to change and create new habits. So change old habits and create new ones. And basically, habits consist of mainly 3 parts: a trigger, and the trigger is the thing that causes the habit. The thing that starts the action of the habit in the first place. So, for example, the trigger for me to drink Red Bull would have been often feeling unhappy. Okay, second part of habits is the routine, and the routine is basically the activity you do. So, for example, in my case, my Red Bull addiction, the routine was drinking Red Bulls, cans of Red Bull, and then one of the last parts, the third part of habits is, according to that book, is the reward. So every habit will have a reward, because otherwise you'll never continually do the habit. There's actually parts of the brain that are devoted to habits, and again, you have to have a reward, otherwise you just wouldn't end up doing it again and again. And another important part, so I mentioned there was 3 main parts, but the author of the book also said that occasionally you need a 4th part, and I think this is actually extremely important. It's belief. And in my case, it was extremely necessary. So belief that you can actually change and create the new habit. So if I didn't believe that I could change, I basically wouldn't have changed. I probably wouldn't have gone through the effort of changing, getting off of this Red Bull addiction, and I wouldn't have had the willpower to do it, and I probably would have given up fairly quickly. Okay, so here are some of the detriments of Red Bull. Okay, so first one is cost. So Red Bulls are generally quite expensive. It doesn't matter the country you're in. So I've been in Spain, Canada, Japan, Hong Kong, America, China, Singapore, I think also Malaysia and other countries. And the European Red Bull, which is the slim version of Red Bull that's usually made in Austria or Switzerland. That's my favorite, and that's the one I would usually drink. Occasionally I would drink the one of the main Thai versions or Indonesian versions, but I would usually drink the European versions. Okay, another detriment was my health. So ironically, I knew that Red Bull made me feel good, but it also caused me health problems. And with the sugar and caffeine highs, I would usually be able to have my focus go up for a short while, and it would give me a boost, but then often I'd have a crash afterwards. And the crashes would affect my ability to work and also probably affected my sleep. But so I mentioned the benefits, and there's also, I mentioned the detriments, but there's also benefits I had for drinking Red Bull. So if there were no benefits, I never would have drunk Red Bull in the first place, or at least drunk so many. So one of the main benefits was feeling better. So every time I drink a Red Bull, I feel good. I love the taste of Red Bull. I love the high it gives me, and I often get a lot of nostalgia from the drink. Okay, so it makes me feel good, and I love the taste of it. So those were, the two main benefits. And about feeling better, so I mentioned the main reason I had this addiction in the first place was due to depression and other reasons. So this helped me with those problems. Okay, so why did I decide to change in the first place? So because of all the detriments that I mentioned, and I finally decided that it was something that just really wasn't good for me, and it could have serious health consequences for me later. So several years ago when I lived in Singapore, I used to drink a bit, not so many, but somebody had mentioned to me that I could get diabetes or some other health issues, drinking Red Bull, a lot of it. But this time I drank really, significantly more than I had when I was living in Singapore a few years ago. And I decided that, it was really bad for me, so I had to change. And it wasn't actually making my depression go away permanently. It was just helping it short term. And additionally, I decided to do this as a challenge to improve myself. And I really wanted to see if I could give it up, quite a lot, severely reduce it. Red Bull is something I've loved for many years, but I wanted to see if I could actually give it up. And additionally, I wanted to work on my willpower. And willpower is roughly synonymous with self-discipline and involves delaying instant gratification. And so this was another reason I did this challenge. Okay, so step 3 for how I did this was having a rough plan. So I mentioned that my goal was to get off of the Red Bull addiction, and I didn't have a specific goal or deadline, but I had a rough idea that I wanted to get off of it, and I kept the idea in my head. If I could do this again, I would have written down the goal, and I probably would have had a SMART goal, something that's specific, measurable, I think that's achievable, realistic, and time-bound. So I should have done this, but anyway, that was my step 3. And step 4 for accomplishing this, how I got off it, was logging and tracking my progress. So with the spreadsheet, I logged how many Red Bulls I was drinking every day, and I tried my best to log every day if I could, but some days I would only log every 2 to 3 days if I was really busy. And when I first started out, I believe I was logging 5 or 6 Red Bulls per day, and eventually that got down. I went down 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, and that took a few weeks to do. I think it may have taken up to 2 months, but logging the progress actually made me feel good along the way, because I could visually see my progress by looking at the spreadsheet. And finally, step 5 was using willpower. So willpower definitely doesn't come naturally to me. But in order to get off of this addiction, I had to exercise a lot of willpower. And I did this challenge completely by myself. I didn't ask anyone for help. And I may have just told, I didn't tell many people at all that even I was doing this. But so basically this was a challenge that I had to do, and I decided to do it in the first place, and it was all on me to do it. And Red Bull was the main vice in my life at the time, and I just really wanted to see if I could do it. Okay, so for just a quick recap, step 1 was to work on my mental health, because I don't think I could have the 5 steps for getting off of my addiction was working on my mental health. Second one was the second one was actually deciding to change. The third one was having a rough plan. Fourth one was tracking my progress. And the fifth step for getting off of this was using willpower. Okay, so a quick caveat. I didn't torture myself to get off of this addiction. If I had, I think I would have failed. So as I mentioned, I started out drinking 5 or 6 per day, and then maybe 1 or 2 weeks later I'd go down to 4, and then maybe a week later I'd go down to 3 per day, and eventually went down to 0 per day. And along the way I started replacing Red Bull with healthier alternatives. Usually this was tea and pure water, and the tea was prepared by myself. So I would usually have a tea bag and make hot water, and then put the tea bag in the hot water. And if I didn't have a good thing to replace my old bad habit, I probably would have just picked up another bad habit. Okay, another quick caveat. I recommend not going cold turkey. I didn't go cold turkey, and going cold turkey means basically to completely stop yourself from doing whatever it is you want to stop, and stopping yourself immediately. So for example, if you're a smoker and you smoke 20 cigarettes per day, going cold turkey would mean one day smoking 20 and the next day smoking 0. For a lot of people this is possible. Well, for a few people this is possible. For probably most people this is extremely difficult, and it can actually backfire on you if you try this. So I definitely don't recommend going cold turkey, because you can end up demotivating yourself if you fail. Okay, so here are a few quick tricks that I did to reduce my temptations and train my willpower. So I would usually buy a 4-pack of Red Bull. So one thing I would do is open up the 4-pack, and I might take 1 or 2 Red Bulls out of the box and put them somewhere else, far away from where the box was. So I'd actually have to go through effort of getting more Red Bulls, more cans of Red Bull. And so with this, if I was being lazy that day, my laziness actually helped me to drink fewer Red Bull cans. And yeah, so that was one thing. Another thing was I would often force myself to drink a certain number of cans per day. So in the morning I might decide I'll drink 3 per day. And so my brain was ready and prepared and basically seeking to drink 3 per day. So I think that was actually a good thing, because I primed my mind psychologically to be ready for that. And another thing too that I did was sometimes I would dump out Red Bull. I would drink a can of Red Bull and take a can of Red Bull, and sometimes I would dump out about half of it, so I'd only be able to drink half of it. And that was one thing that helped me to finish this. Okay, so another issue about this challenge was long-term versus short-term pleasure. So I definitely get a lot of short-term pleasure from drinking Red Bull, but one of the biggest payoffs I got from this was feelings of self-respect and accomplishment. So I think actually the long-term pleasure of accomplishing this goal overall feels a lot better than the short-term pleasure I would get. Okay, continuing on. So as I was mentioning about short-term versus long-term pleasure, I think that accomplishing this this challenge by getting off of my Red Bull addiction made me think more and more about short-term and long-term pleasure. So I definitely got a lot of short-term pleasure from drinking Red Bull, but I think overall the long-term pleasure of drinking Red Bull was bigger. If you can have some sort of objective pleasure measure, I think the long-term pleasure was greater than the short-term pleasure. So that was one thing. So basically it gave me a feeling of self-respect, accomplishment, and this is something that I can remember for the rest of my life. Whereas, drinking a Red Bull, maybe I can feel pleasure from it for, I don't know, an hour or two, but this accomplishment I can remember for the rest of my life. Okay, so now for you. So I didn't just do this challenge to talk about myself. I actually did it in part to learn more myself about accomplishing goals, and I want to be able to teach you how you can accomplish your goals and your challenges. So my specific goal or challenge was to get off of Red Bull. I had a Red Bull addiction, but your challenge can be whatever you want it to be. And the 5 steps that I had to get off of this, I believe you can use the same. So for whatever goal you want to have, I think that you can use these 5 steps to get what you want. So step 1 is to work on your mental health, work on your mind, and get that under control. Okay, so no matter what addiction or challenge you want to work on, if your mind isn't where it should be, you may have significant difficulties to accomplish your goal. And mental health issues are something that millions of people around the world have, so should be nothing to be ashamed of. And it's best to get help if you need it. And if you do need professional help, I recommend seeing a doctor, a counselor, or other qualified professionals in that field if you really need more help. But no matter what, I recommend getting help from your family and friends. Exercising. I think exercising actually really does help. Meditation. This might actually be one of the best ways to work on your mental health, and also having a healthy diet. So the three things: exercise, meditation, and healthy diet, they all help quite a bit with your mental health. Okay, again, step 2 is to decide and ideally commit to your change. So, as I mentioned, I decided to get off of my Red Bull addiction. And ideally for you, you should commit to it. And even better is to commit to it publicly, or at least commit to it to your family and or friends. So you want to be accountable, not just to yourself, but you want to be, if you're accountable to other people, you're more likely to work on the challenge. Okay, so step 3 is to know your target. So basically, so know exactly what you want to do, what you want to accomplish. So this may require a lot of time and self-reflection, but knowing your target will save you lots of time and headaches in the long run. And you might actually have several addictions or several things you want to work on, but I recommend you just work on one at a time. And ideally, if you want to make a goal, I recommend making something that's called a SMART goal. Again, that's something that's specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. And you can Google SMART goals to learn more about that. But I definitely think that SMART goals are an effective method for working on goals. And regarding knowing your target, you know, it may be a cliche, but it's true that you can't hit a target you can't see. So, so anyway, know what you want, and you'll end up feeling better, and you'll probably accomplish more. Okay, so step 4 is to log and track your progress. So I specifically logged my progress for a few reasons. First, it allowed me to visually see my progress, and also I became more self-aware when I was logging my progress. And you know, so for example, when I went from 5 or 6 per day down to 3 per day, it felt quite good. And so if you look at your progress over time, it can actually motivate you more to keep going. But remember, I said in SMART goals, the M is measurable. So make sure your goal is measurable. If it's not measurable, it will be difficult to accomplish. Certainly a lot more difficult than if it was measurable. So I recommend that you have a goal that's measurable and also track your progress along the way. And then step 5 is to use your willpower. And willpower is extremely important in so many aspects of life. And it's usually necessary to go towards a goal. And thankfully, willpower can be trained, though. You might think that you have little willpower. I certainly thought I did. But willpower can be trained. And actually, by working on your goal, you can increase your willpower. And one book I definitely recommend is called The Willpower Instinct by Kelly McGonigal. And she's a lecturer or professor at Stanford University in the US. and her book is quite good, so I highly recommend it. And yeah, and another thing too is I recommend to have small goals. So a lot of people, if you listen to some motivational speakers, they might recommend to you that you should have big goals, be super ambitious and all this sort of stuff. But in my experience, it's good to start out with small goals, because if you're too ambitious, you might end up demotivating yourself if you fail. So I think it's good to slowly build up your self-confidence and your ability to accomplish goals. And then as you get better and better over time, you can have more ambitious goals and bigger goals. Okay, so finally, here are some things I learned from this challenge that I think you can apply. So one thing is that developing willpower and accomplishing goals can be hard, for sure. But the overall pleasure I got from accomplishing these goals was a lot bigger than the short-term pleasure of indulging in my addiction. Additionally, mindset and belief are super important. So make sure that you have a positive growth mindset, because there have been many studies that show that people who have a positive growth mindset can end up accomplishing a lot more than people who don't, who think that, for example, intelligence is fixed or skill is fixed from some early age. But if you have a positive growth mindset, you can end up accomplishing a lot more. And additionally, believe in yourself and believe that you can actually accomplish this goal. As I mentioned, if I didn't believe in the goal that I could do it, I probably wouldn't have been able to accomplish it. And as for my specific challenge, I still love Red Bull, but I know that overall, Red Bull cans are a lot more detrimental than beneficial. And I'm sure in your life you have some things that you love but are really bad for you. So ideally you choose not to indulge in those things. And besides being expensive, another thing I forgot to mention is that I actually gained a bit of weight from drinking so many Red Bulls every day. And once I got off of the Red Bull addiction, I've actually lost a lot of weight. Now there's other factors too, like I've changed my diet a lot, I exercise a lot more, I meditate, and all of those things contribute. But I think if I had done nothing else except get off of Red Bull and replace the Red Bull with just water and tea, I think I would have lost a lot of weight as well. And as I mentioned, if I could do this challenge again, I would have been more specific and I would have written down the goal. But I'm glad at least that I accomplished something. And as for Red Bull in my future, I don't think I'll cut myself out completely. I'm definitely okay with drinking Red Bull again in the future, but ideally I'd like to keep the Red Bull consumption down to maybe 1 or 2 cans per month. But if I think that I will indulge in Red Bull, I'm open to never drinking Red Bull again. So, okay, so I hope you enjoyed this video. And again, this was about how I got off of my Red Bull addiction. And I'd appreciate it if you could give this video a thumbs up. Please subscribe to my channel and feel free to leave a comment. Thank you.